Hey guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be filming my TBR for May. Specifically, I am planning to participate in the Readathon Misery May. This Readathon is being hosted by Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot and Gem from Gem of Books. And it is a readathon focused around primarily Thomas Hardy, who, if you don't know, is one of my favorite authors of all time, if not my favorite author of all time. I love Hardy, I've read all of his novels, and I'm happy to dive back into him, but it's also surrounding just miserable books in general. It sounds like they kind of got inspired to do this because Jane Austen July is a very popular readathon, which is great. We love Jane Austen and her books are very happy and cheery, but the host of this readathon really wanted to celebrate Thomas Hardy and the more melancholy side of books. And me being a tragedy lover, it just was right up my alley. I couldn't not participate. So let's get into their prompts and when I'm reading for each of the prompts. I also should mention, I know I usually do a ranking of my previous month's reads along with my TBR for the next month, but unfortunately, due to various things going on in my life, I'm not going to be able to put this up at the beginning of May/end of April. I'm obviously doing it in the middle of April, so I want to give myself more time to actually get through books this month, so I'm going to do a ranking wrap-up specific video for April later early on in May. So anyway, let's get into the prompt. So the first prompt is, of course, to read a novel by Thomas Hardy, and I've decided I think I'm going to reread The Trumpet Major. This is one that I have really fond memories of. I've considered it one of my favorite Hardy novels, but I actually don't remember a lot about the plot. I remember how it ends, and that's pretty much it, and so I really want to remind myself of a lot more plot points and see if it actually is one of my favorites or if I just had exaggerated my original feelings of enjoyment with this book. So I'm very excited to reread this. I guess I should tell you what it's about. So this follows, it's set during the Napoleonic Wars, and we follow a young woman who ends up, of course, meeting various men, and they all are vying for her attention. But it's interesting because one of them she actually has had a past with, and so she has affection for him already. Then she meets kind of the wealthy guy in the town, but he's not very flattering and she's not comfortable with him, but he is wealthy. And then there's the brother actually of the one she has a past with, who is the trumpet major of the title, and he had never met her before, but now he's interested. So that is where the story starts, and yeah, like I said, I'm excited to get back into this and see if it still is one I would consider a favorite of Hardy novels for me. The second prompt is to read either a short story or a poem by Hardy. I think I'm going to go with one of his poems or a few of his poems. I have this ginormous collection of his complete works of poetry. The man wrote so much poetry, as you can see, but from that. I did consider doing short stories. However, I did recently read a short story collection by him, so I wanted to do a little more poetry instead. Then the third prompt is to read just a miserable book, and so I have plenty of options for that, which I'll go through, but I'm going to go through them in the order of the final three prompts, which are word association prompts based on some of Hardy's novels. So the first one is Cliffhanger or Underwear, and this comes from A Pair of Blue Eyes by Thomas Hardy. This was a serialized novel, and it actually prompted the use of the word cliffhanger to describe a cliffhanger in a book, because one of the weeks that this book was being serialized, Hardy literally left one of his characters hanging off a cliff, and so you had to wait for the next publication to find out what happened. And part of that too was that this person who was hanging off a cliff, an attempt was made to save him using underwear, so hence the cliffhanger and underwear bit. There's a lot I could have done with this, and honestly the Trumpet Major has a sort of cliffhanger aspect to the ending, not severe, but it's a little on the more vague side in some ways, and so I could have just done that, but it's time. It's just time for me to get to Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is the third and final book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I really enjoyed the first two. After the second one, I wasn't in love with the ending. There was just a few frustrations I had, not in a I hate this book way, but just in a I need a break from this story way, and so I've taken my break and I think I'm ready to dive back into this. So I decided to go with this because fantasy is known for cliffhangers. There's been some cliffhanger aspects from the second book moving into this one, so I feel like that will just work for that. And I am terribly, terribly excited to be completing this trilogy. I'm really sad, but I'm also looking forward to future series within this grand series of the realm of the Elderlings that will contain Fitz and the Fool as well. So anyway, I will finally be getting to this for that. And it counts as a miserable book because Fitz is just a miserable person. So I feel like there's just a lot of sadness going on in this story, and there's always going to be sadness in this series. The next prompt is to read a book with architecture or building as part of the plot, or just somewhere, some aspect of architecture and building somewhere. This comes from A Laodicean by Thomas Hardy, in which the main character, the main male character, is an architect, and a lot of the plot revolves around this castle that the main female character owns. So yes, that's very central to that plot. I have a few I've thought of for this, so it will just depend on, first of all, my mood, but also I still have a couple weeks left in this month, and I know that I'll probably at least have some of these as potential options for this month, so I may read them sooner than May, but these are options for May for this prompt. First, I have The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys, or Sepetys, I'm never sure how to pronounce her name. This is a story that takes place during the Spanish Civil War, and that is literally all I know. I think we follow a female and a male character, and I don't know anything else, but I don't need to, because Ruta Sepetys is wonderful. I've loved the other two books I've already read from her. Salt to the Sea, of the two, I've read Salt to the Sea and Between Shades of Grey, and I preferred Salt to the Sea for sure. But I've heard good things about this one as well, so I figure it's set during the Spanish Civil War. There's gonna be sadness, and I've read two of her other books, and there's misery in those books, so I'm assuming this will also contain that. And this matches the prompt because, I mean, fountains, you could argue that that has to do with architecture, but there's also on the cover some architecture in the background, so either way, this will work for that. I also have here The Good Wife of Bath by Karen Brooks. This one is exactly what it sounds like. It is a retelling of the story of the wife of Bath in the Canterbury Tales, who is a very fascinating character within that collection of short stories, I guess, kind of. I honestly went into Storygraph and just researched what books had sad as one of their moods, sad, dark, emotional, things like that, and kind of browsed through, and this was one that it said was sad and emotional, so I decided to go with it as a potential option. And this one is very much just based on the cover. As far as the architecture, there's like little castles and houses right there, so that's why I chose this as a potential option for this particular prompt. And then I do have one other potential option. Well, kind of a couple of other options, but I'll get to that in a little bit. The third one that's more specifically for this is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And I chose this for this prompt because it takes place on a college campus, so there's college buildings going on. I think they also will probably discuss some level of classic art and stuff. I'm not 100% certain, but that can play a role in architecture as well. But mostly the school aspect of it was what made me think of this as a potential. And this one is just really miserable because all the characters are awful and there's awful things being done, and so it's not really miserable as far as it's not gonna probably make me cry, but I do think that it's just full of miserable people and miserable things happening, so I figured it would work well for this. The final word association prompt for this readathon is either astronomy or stars, and this comes from Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy, in which the male lead is seeking to be an astronomer, and there's a lot to do with looking at the stars within that book. So I have a few potential options. First of all, there is another readathon going on in May, the May of the Moderns, which is hosted by Margaret Pinard. And so I wanted to see if I could get one or two books within the modern era in this, so I can also slightly participate in that readathon. So I may end up picking up Anne Frank's diary because I've had this on so many TBRs, and I just need to read it because I feel silly that I haven't. It's obviously miserable because, I mean, it's Anne Frank's diary of a young Jewish girl during World War II. It's gonna be sad. And there's two reasons why I chose this as potentially working with this prompt. First of all, and the biggest reason, is due to the Star of David being a key symbol for the Jewish people, so that I felt like worked. Also, I feel like Anne Frank is kind of a very famous person. She is a very famous person, so she's kind of a star in her own right. So she's kind of a star because she's famous, so there's that aspect as well. So that is one that probably of these three the most likely I am to pick up for this prompt because it is one I really want to get to. But like I said, I do have a couple other options. So first of all, I have The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. Obviously, this one's based on the cover. It has all these stars on it. So that's why this potentially could work. This is one that was just marked as emotional in Storygraph, which could mean that it has sad things, but it could also mean that it's just kind of your emotions are all over the place. So we'll see if it's actually miserable if I get to it, but all I know about this is it's about a woman who ends up marrying this man, and he builds her a little miniature version of their home and of them, I believe. And something happens where she starts to realize that things in this house, in this mini house, are kind of reflecting things in the bigger house, in the real house. So it's got a magical realism element to it, and I've heard great things. So that has potential. It's also not quite as long as some of the others on this list. So it could be one that if I finish for the other ones like Anne Frank and Assassin's Quest and one of the architecture books, Hardy's novel, and I still have time to read more, this is one that could also be one that I just end up reading after all those. And then I have here one that's probably the least likely to be read, but I wanted to put it on here because I'm really excited about it. It's a recent release, and it is Her Lost Words by Stephanie Marie Thornton. And this goes back and forth following the stories of both Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft, her mother. It is a fictionalized book. I know I recently read Romantic Outlaws that is a non-fiction version of that same premise, but this is one that is a fictional version of that premise. So I'm very excited whenever I get to this, but I decided it would work for Misery May because their lives were not happy necessarily. There was a lot of misery involved, unfortunately, in both of their lives for various reasons. And I decided to put it with my options for stars because both of these women are stars, are historical literary stars. So there's that. Then I have a few other possibilities that I could end up picking up if I'm more in the mood for them, and I do have ways in my head that I could make them work for a couple of the prompts. So if I don't get to mostly the architecture and the stars prompts, because obviously Assassin's Quest I know for sure I'm going to read for the cliffhanger prompts, and then I have my Thomas Hardy novel and the poetry. But for those other two word associations, it's kind of more up in the air, as you've probably been able to tell from this. So I have a few other miserable books that I could probably twist into working for one of those prompts if I ended up being in the mood for one of these. So first of all, continuing with the May of the Moderns focus, I have Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. This is one that follows a character from Jane Eyre. I'm not going to say who because that has a spoiler associated with it. But if you have read Jane Eyre and haven't read this, knowing that it's about that person, you would probably assume that this was going to be sad. It also is marked as sad in Storygraph as one of its moods, so yes, I think this will for sure be a sad book if I end up getting to it. Next, I have one that actually could work for both stars and architecture in a way, and that's 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. This is a story following women through the Trojan War. So it will jump around between different perspectives of many women who are known as being part of the Trojan War in some way. And this one is also marked as sad on Storygraph because, I mean, it's women in the Trojan War. None of them really had a lot of happy things happen to them, unfortunately. Like I said, this one could work for either because ships, I mean, you could make arguments about architecture there, the Trojan city. As far as stars, there are some, I can't tell if they're supposed to be suns or stars, but there's little symbols that kind of look like they could be considered stars. These women are also stars of Greek mythology, so that's another option as well. Then I have Lancelot by Giles Kristian. I've really Unfortunately, I wanted to have a year where I was reading a little bit more Arthurian focused books, and I really haven't done that very much, unfortunately, so far. So I would love to get to this. Again, it was marked sad and emotional on Storygraph. This one I would probably just say architecture because Camelot, and stars because a similar thing, Lancelot is a star of myths and legends. So that's another potential if I find myself in such a mood to read this. Then I, of course, could read a tragedy by Shakespeare. I don't know which one. I only have a few of the tragedies left. I do have a few historical ones left, which can be also counted as tragedies, some of them, so I could read something of that. But anyway, I have options in here if I wanted to just get something done quick. And the final book I'm going to mention doesn't really work for any of the prompts, but it does work for this readathon, and it will be very clear why when I tell you what it is. But it is Thomas Hardy by Claire Tomalin, a biography about Thomas Hardy. This is one that I've wanted to get to for so long, so potentially I could see if I could finally get around to reading this, because this is another one that has been on many a TBR and I still haven't read it. Watch me by the end of May still not have read it, but there's potential there. I feel like I had to mention it at least because it's about Thomas Hardy and it would work for this readathon for that purpose. So anyway, those are my plans. Let me know down below if you're participating in either of these readathons, either Misery May or May of the Moderns, as I would love to know. I will of course have all of the hosts for both of those readathons linked in my description so you can go over to their channels and see more information about these readathons. I hope you are having a wonderful reading month, and I will see you next time. Bye!